Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that those of you who are in the room are here with us. Those of you who are online, we're glad you're here as well. So we have both online through our live.anona.com website, and we also have people joining us from Zoom. And I think we have how many on Zoom right now?
About
25 people on, so that's awesome. So thank you for joining us online. Amongst that group, guys, a lot of people in here are probably from Anona. A lot of the people that are online are actually from our district anti-racism team, so they were invited as well, and we want to celebrate that they are part of this. Yes, I see Lee back there going, that's us, and Sue going, that's us. So thank you for that team that's doing that work throughout our district. We are honored to be able to have a night like this where we get to share some time with Rachana Wood, who is a specialist in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she will be speaking to us for about 40 minutes or so, sharing some things that she teaches regularly around the world. Her organization, and Rachana, you'll be able to correct me on the pronunciation of this, I think it's Grundfos, is in, I think, 56 different countries around the world. So I don't even know where she's joining us from tonight, and I'll be interested to find out where she's joining us from. But she travels the world doing what we're going to talk about tonight in real time with the staff that's associated with Grundfos. What I'd love to do is have a moment of prayer and invite those of you that are online, that if you did not hear me a little bit earlier, if you came on a little bit later, stay muted. We've muted you currently, but stay muted until we get back to the place where we offer opportunities to share, because if you come online, your speaker might interfere with what we're doing here. With that, let's have a moment of prayer together. God, we just want to acknowledge your presence in this moment. And Lord, not just this moment in the sense of this very second, this very minute, but in this moment of time, this moment when our nation and people around the world are realizing with greater and greater clarity the reality of racism and its presence in our world and in our lives. And so, God, we gather tonight humbly at your feet and humbly at Rachana's feet, asking God that through her you might speak to us about ways that we can live a life that is more just, more equitable. And Lord, for this church called Anona and this church called the United Methodist Church to be a place that becomes even better at welcoming all. Lord, we pray this, and we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and we all say, Amen. And I'm going to turn it over to April. And by the way, I didn't introduce myself for those of you who are online. I'm Richard Landon, Senior Pastor at Anona United Methodist Church. So now I can introduce April, who is our specialist here at Anona that has been guiding us through our Stand Up with Anona team for probably over a year now. We've been about a year and a half. A leadership team was put together, and April's been integral to that. And so she's going to help to facilitate our conversation both in the room and outside of the room with Rachana. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so mine is just some technical information. Friends that are in the room, Rachana can't hear you if you don't have a mic in your face. So if we're going to ask some questions towards the end, I'm going to just ask that you raise your hand, and then we'll bring the mic to you so she's able to hear your questions. Those of you that are participating online, and we're strongly going to encourage that you just send your messages to me. If you private chat me, you can choose my name from the drop-down. Again, it's April Maitner. I will be compiling the questions and kind of putting them together so that we can ask as much of our wonderings as possible within the time frame we have allowed. So please send your questions to me if you have them. In the room, if you guys have a notebook, paper, or something, you can write them down. I can combine all of our questions together. But if not, we'll try and have some time to ask those questions of her as she completes, as time allows. And then I'm just super excited. I would like to take a minute to recognize this is the first time we've ever been together. So everybody that's here in the room with us, we've been doing this work for a little over a year, and this is the first opportunity we've had to be face-to-face. So I just want to celebrate that a little bit with the group, that this work has really gone on a lot online, but it's been very nice, and it's wonderful to see all your faces.
Absolutely. And one last final thing, we are recording this, so it's also going to be switched over straight over to our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back, missing notes, things like that, it'll be on the Anona YouTube channel as well.
Oh, I have one note, and Emmy is absolutely correct. If you are viewing this as a Zoom online, you want to put it in speaker mode. That's going to make it so Rachana's face is the first and only thing that you kind of have pinned to your screen so you're able to see her as she speaks. We will do that here so our people in person can see that. But from home, that's going to be the best view is speaker view. See if we can find her. Jonathan, can you find Rachana for us and make her our speaker view?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yay!
Fantastic. You have got to love modern technology. It is so amazing to see so many people in the room and online. I really appreciate having an opportunity to speak with you tonight. I guess it is tonight, yes, this evening, on unconscious bias and why it's so important to really understand what it is and how we can really understand ways for us to recognize when we have moments where we could be inadvertently using unconscious bias in our interactions as a way to become more inclusive and more understanding and accepting of others, especially those with different perspectives. I do have a presentation. If I share my screen, I don't know if that's going to help. Let me know if this works. What are you seeing?
We see your Zoom screen rather than your presentation.
Okay, let's try this again. I wonder why that's happening. While I'm trying to get myself sorted out, and my apologies. I am actually calling from a little town in Denmark called Bjerringbro. I'm here this week with my colleagues. In fact, it's really funny. We're talking tomorrow about this very topic as part of a leadership team. So thank you very much for the opportunity to get a little bit of a warm up this evening.
A trial run. I think we also have the slideshow if you'd like. Jonathan might be able to put it up. We don't want him to put it up
might
for
be
you?
best.
And then you can
Yeah,
just cue
thank
us
you.
for the changes when you want the slide to change.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Oh, perfect. So if everyone can see the screen, I'd like to just start, if you just move to this, the first slide, just with a little bit of introduction and an agenda of what I'd like to go through over the next few minutes. And
Can I interrupt for just a second? For the Zoom people, we don't get to see it very well. I'm wondering if I can also, if I have host capabilities, I could also share it on the Zoom link. Aha, there you go. Never mind.
So I do see it on the Zoom link. Yeah. Perfect. If you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. Great. So what I'd like to do is just spend a little time, just a quick introduction on who I am and what I do, a little bit about my background, talk a little bit about what unconscious bias is, the different types, how we can avoid it, and really some sharing for those of you who are comfortable sharing experiences and feedback from the session, hopefully that you've had a chance to do through the implicit bias link. And then talk a little bit about how can understanding unconscious bias make us more inclusive as individuals and as a community. And then have some time for wrap-up reflections. And then as mentioned, time permitting, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So as we get started, we'll stay on this slide, but as we get started, just a little bit of introduction about myself. So as mentioned, my name is Rachana Wood. So I was born and raised, I was born in the US, but I was raised all over the world in 5 different continents. My dad is a diplomat. And so we were blessed to be able to be in different countries and different schools growing up. I then came to the United States for college, and after college, got married and settled in the United States. I have a husband, Peter, and 2 wonderful kids. Actually, I have 4 wonderful kids. I have 2 human and 2 furry kids. My daughter is 22, my son is 21, and then I have a 13-year-old Shih Tzu girl and a 3-year-old Terrier mix, and they're the love of my life. Professionally, I've been in HR my whole entire career. I spent time in United Technologies Carrier. I spent time at Shell. I actually was the head of diversity and inclusion for the U.S. and Shell before I left and joined Grundfos 2 years ago, where I am heading up an HR organization, a global HR organization, and I'm part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, which we just started. It's interesting, when I think about my journey, both professional and personal. It's funny how things seem to happen, and build me. I think for being able to address as much as I can this topic, and really be able to work on how can I be a person who really, we talk about seeing people being colorblind, being agnostic to, backgrounds and everything, but how can we really do that, right? How do we do that? Because inadvertently, there are going to be unconscious biases that we might have, and how do we then navigate the space of being inclusive and being acceptive, and being able to really understand other perspectives, while recognizing, right, that who we are comes into play with every interaction that we have. One of the things that has helped me a little bit is growing up and being the new kid in a school, in a different country, in a different culture, and having to really take a step back and recognize that things happen differently. What we think is normal in the United States may not be considered normal in other cultures. And how do I adapt, and how do I respect and recognize that that's okay? And that's also valuable, because those perspectives might really open my eyes up to how things are happening in other places, and give me an appreciation that there's so much more that I can see than what I have the ability to see today. And then I bring it to what's happening in the world today. There's so many issues going on with everything, right? With race, with gender, with sexual orientation, with nationality, and how do all those things come to play in our day-to-day interactions, and how we interface and interact with others. So it's kind of been a very interesting journey, and I'll be honest with you, as I go through talking about unconscious biases, as well as the practicalities of it. And as we share experiences, I found some extremely humbling moments in my life that really made me realize that, everybody has unconscious biases, and it's okay, as long as we accept that we do, and we're willing to acknowledge that there are things, and the things that we need to do, or ways we need to approach things that may help us address those unconscious biases. So enough of that. Let's talk a little bit about what is an unconscious bias. So if you wouldn't mind changing to the next slide, please. So unconscious biases, and it's also called implicit bias, they're defined as prejudice or unsupported judgments in favor or against a thing or a person or a group, and in a way that's usually considered unfair. I'm going to give you a very high level, completely non-people related example, but just to kind of give you an example of how the unconscious biases can range, right? I am, as I mentioned earlier, 2 of my 4 babies are fur babies, and they're both dogs. I have a passion for dogs, and for some reason, I don't know why, I just have not been able to relate to cats, and I don't know why. So when you talk about unconscious biases, right? Unconscious biases can affect the workplaces and organizations, and frankly, homes. It can introduce unintentional discrimination and result in poor decision-making. And it can be a huge setback in creating a truly diverse and inclusive space. I'm a dog person. My family has only had dogs. My daughter adopts a cat. So now I'm a grandma. I have a grandcat. And I love that cat because she's my daughter's cat, and she's a baby in the family. But it's very interesting because I was having a conversation with her over the weekend, and I do my best to really try to connect with Kenny, the little cat, and just try to build that relationship, because again, I love animals. And what I didn't realize was, as I was doing that, I kept talking more about my dogs, my brother's dogs, my niece's dogs. And she was like, hey, wait a minute, how come you always switch the conversation back from Kenny to the dogs? And that was my unconscious bias coming out. It wasn't that I didn't love Kenny. I loved that cat, but my unconscious bias was my favoring dogs over cats was coming out, and I was inadvertently hurting her feelings. So again, it doesn't have to be something very direct, or it doesn't have to be very stark for it to be an unconscious bias that comes out, but it still has an impact. So I didn't need to hurt my daughter's feelings, but I inadvertently was, because I wasn't taking check on my unconscious bias, and I wasn't really recognizing that, maybe I do talk too much about dogs, and there is a cat in our lives now, and I need to be more accepting and be able to really, include that in my life. Again, a very broad example, but hopefully it kind of helps set the stage a little bit about how it's the little things, right, that we do that can either help or hinder our ability to have that inclusive spirit and inclusive heart. Unconscious bias is triggered in our brain automatically for making quick judgments and assessments, and they're influenced by our background, personal experiences, stereotypes, and cultural context. In my example, in this instance, it was personal experiences, right? I was experienced with dogs only. I'd not been around cats, and that's what kind of triggered this unconscious bias on my end. Having said that, unconscious bias isn't always a bad thing. And I'll give you, I'm going to take a step back and just ask this question. And if you're online, feel free to type in your answer. But can anyone tell me why an unconscious bias might be good? Or give me an example of a good unconscious bias. Kind of stumped you there, right? How can unconscious biases be good? Because it's a bad thing, right? It's not a good thing to have. And I apologize if I cut anyone off. Did anyone have any comments? Otherwise, I was going to give you an example.
No, I was ready for anybody that was ready in here and online, and no one answered.
No worries, no worries. So imagine that you're in a high traffic street, okay? And you're getting ready to cross the street, and you have a little that's right. In the comments, it says sometimes can help manage risks. Exactly. So the walk sign has gone from white to red, okay? And it's blinking red, which means cars are going to start coming. Your instinct reaction is going to be to stop, and then wait till the light turns white next time, so it's safe for you to cross the street, right? Because unconsciously you've been programmed since you were a child that when you're looking at a red light, it means stop, it means wait, it's meant to keep you safe. So that triggers safety, right? And that's a trigger to make sure that you're not putting yourself in harm's way. Same thing with fire. Not to touch fire. Your unconscious biases, or it could be experience, but you're told stay away from hot things, it's bad. So you're programmed to say, okay, it looks dangerous, I'm going to stay away. Those are unconscious biases that are triggering your reactions, and those aren't necessarily bad. So it's just to say that we all have unconscious biases. Some are good, some are not so positive, but it doesn't mean that it's not okay to have them. It just means that we need to recognize that we have them so we can address them. But does that make sense? So then if you move to the next slide. Unconscious bias is not just what's visible, and I'm sure you've heard of the iceberg in very many different scenarios, but it's very small print, and I do apologize for it. But just to kind of give you a high view, right? There's things that are easy to see: the language a person speaks, the accent a person has, the skin tone, the dress that they wear, the holidays and festivals they may dress up for that might define their culture, the food that they eat. So many visible things that define a person, right? That could or couldn't cause unconscious bias. But then there's the roles in the family, the beliefs and assumptions, family values, the concept of justice, faith, thought patterns, all of the above, right? Things that you can't really see, that can also be triggers of unconscious bias. So it's really important. It's really important because it may be biases, but not towards things that are physical, but it could be different types of unconscious biases. So I'll give you a second to kind of look at the cultural iceberg, because then I have another question for you, and I really would love to hear from you on this next question. Just to kind of start beginning the conversation. So if you would move, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just so you know, the part that says difficult to see, the whole screen is difficult for us to see in the room. So we can't read the fine print. If your question is regarding to it, we can't read the fine print down here.
So apologize for that. But does anyone have any questions on the
okay.
cultural iceberg? And we'll touch on this a little bit more. And I think, as mentioned, the slides will be available for you for future reference as well. But at the end of the day, the takeaway really is that you're going to have easy to see and very difficult to see biases that could exist in oneself or in others. So if you move to the next slide. And this is where I would love to hear from you. So let's just kind of start throwing out answers. What are the different types of unconscious biases? Race, thank you.
Different shades of
Ethnicity?
skin.
Shades of skin, yes. Age,
Gender.
gender,
Clothes.
Language
Accents,
or
clothes.
accents.
yep. Fear of darkness,
Clothing, what we choose to wear.
what we choose to wear.
Tattoos.
Absolutely, that's a great one. Tattoos,
Hairstyles.
hairstyles,
Different choice in employment, jobs.
yes. Neighborhoods,
Education, levels of education.
education, absolutely.
Or value for education.
Absolutely.
Vehicles.
Weight, yes. Vehicles,
Sexual
Piercings?
orientation.
sexual orientation, yes.
Oh, your physique, the shape of the person, large, small.
Yep.
Piercings, weight.
Piercings, education, yep.
The things I have versus the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, for sure.
Age.
Political party, religion, yes.
Wise. We say wise people. Any others in
Yeah.
the room? Religion, online.
Nationality. That's great. That's fantastic. You are absolutely right. Unfortunately, there isn't just a short list. But what I'd like to do is, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I'd like to share just some other examples of unconscious bias. A lot, and actually most of which have already been addressed by you. But in just in a different twist, right? So there's the ageism. So this is about either. It's either valuing or devaluing age, right? Either being young or old. There's the conformity bias, right? So if my friends are biased towards, butter pecan ice cream, then so am I. So it's less about what I think. It's more about how I conform to how the others around me feel and are biased towards. There's a weight bias, as you said, right? A bias towards people who might be overweight or people who are underweight, right? It could go either which way. A bias, an affinity bias, right? So my affinity is towards dogs. So there is a bias there that can impact my interactions. Confirmation bias. So this is about wanting to say something that others agree with, right? So this is a bias towards getting that confirmation. Yes, you're right. That's correct. Beauty bias. Definition of beauty is so diverse. It's so different. It really is in the eye of the beholder, right? But there is a bias. For example, for example, you guys brought up tattoos and piercings, right? And a lot of times the unconscious bias might be, yeah, that's, gang or something more negative. But I happen to know a lot of people who are pastors, who are the most amazing people I've ever met, who have tattoos and piercings, right? So it's really about looking beyond the physical appearance and what is it that the individual brings to the table. Gender bias, right? So it's both around male and female, but also those in the LGBTQ plus community. What kind of biases might there be towards someone who has a different sexual orientation or preference than you? Attribution biases or making assumptions basis. So like I said with the piercings, right? Making an assumption that anyone with piercings or tattoos must have some sort of a shady past or a shady present. The name bias. So if the name is not traditional, right? So Rachana, what kind of a name is that? I've not heard of it. It's unusual. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How is that perceived? Height bias. I love this one personally because it's an unconscious bias sometimes towards either those very tall or those very short. And the best example I can give is grocery stores. Sometimes I wonder, right, if the stalkers have some sort of an unconscious bias towards those that are vertically challenged, like myself, because inevitably the things that I really want are always on the higher shelves, and it's like, come on, really? What about? And it might be because they happen to be a tall individual. I don't know if anybody else has, goes through that, but certainly, right? So these are just a few examples of the different types of biases, and thank you for sharing yours as well. Love it, Sarah, because yes, short people unite. But see, that's a bias towards those who aren't short, so that's not very good either, right? So again, it's being careful. And please don't get me wrong. This conversation today is not about being politically correct. It's got nothing to do with political correctness. It's about recognizing how we impact, how we think or what we do or what we say, what our behaviors do to impact other people. So there is a fine line, and I just wanted to kind of put that out there. But what's interesting with unconscious biases is it's not a one-for-one. So if you don't mind going back to the slide again, I'd like to kind of just talk a little bit about the picture that was on the right. So in this picture, don't worry about what's in the writing. I'm sorry again, really, really hard to read. Handicap bias is absolutely right. Disability, or is it ability? That's just different, right? But it's these are two individuals having a conversation, and you can see, right, that the conversation is a whole lot is happening in that conversation. So you've got this person with an unconscious bias. Listening to this individual, Klesha, talking, and all they're seeing is ignorance, they're seeing attachment, they're seeing aversion. There's so many different things that are coming out based on that conversation. So and that's the reality is it's not, when you have interactions or when you kind of assess a situation, it's not usually just a one-for-one bias, right? It might be, I saw a person who was different skin than I am, who was talking with an accent and had tattoos and piercings. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, they don't, there's a whole bunch of different things going on in your mind, right? Because it could lead to a whole bunch of different thoughts that come out from an unconscious bias standpoint. But I think really this is to say, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to address unconscious bias, but kind of as a sneak peek, it's really about being able to take that pause and that self-assessment, and be able to really look at the situation and look at the interactions and be able to openly take a deep breath and go, okay, am I saying something that is what I'm saying coming from a place of awareness, and does it take into consideration that there might be some unconscious biases out there? So how do you avoid unconscious biases? So if you could move to the next slide, please. So the first thing is to accept that we all have unconscious biases. And I'll in a moment or two, I'll just share my story with you of one of the most eye-opening experiences that I had. The other is to avoid making assumptions and relying on gut instincts, because although gut instincts can be good, we talked about it with the traffic light and safety. If you just rely on that, sometimes it can also bring in more than, it can bring in more than just kind of the protective unconscious biases. Make considered decisions, monitor your behavior, pay attention to bias-related and protected characteristics, widen your social circle, and set ground rules for behavior. And basically all this is about, it's about awareness. It's about recognizing we all have biases. It's okay. How do we monitor our behaviors? How do we just do a sanity check, right? So again, intentions are 90% well-intended. So a lot of times when these interactions occur, it doesn't come from a start of prejudice, right? It comes from unconsciously bringing in some biases that may impact how things come up or how things are perceived. And so being able to recognize where you might have unconscious biases, thinking about your upbringing, thinking about your own background, thinking about how you were raised and how that might influence how you think or see things, to say, but does that make me see things in a way that is fair to what I'm seeing? So how do you ask yourself that question, and how do you put that challenge to yourself and be more conscious about it? And a little bit later, we'll talk a little bit about, moving from a state of being, I have to look at my notes, I apologize. Moving from a state of being, having unconscious bias to evolving into having unconscious inclusion, right? So how does one shift from having those biases that may make us less inclusive to having to becoming individuals where we're able to recognize that we have biases, but we're able to then be more inclusive just as we evolve and become more aware of ourselves. Any questions or comments so far? Any feedback?
1 second, we have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Rachana, on your first slide, that the definition of bias, you mentioned the word, which is generally considered to be unfair. Mm-hmm. Could you say a little bit more of that? Because let me give an example. When I go to the airport, it depends on what's going on in the world, but take 1972, the shooting in Munich. If I would go to the airport, I would certainly not go in a line where I see turbans or long dresses. We make that decision to stay with the airport and choosing which line you go in a split second. And they're based on tons of biases.
Yes.
There could be somebody ahead of you who's making a scene. You said, I'm not going to take that one. Is that unfair? Is that a bias, and is it unfair? Or is it
it's unfair? An excellent, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I think that is an excellent question. And so as I said, it's so it depends on where that's coming from, right? Is it coming from a place of prejudice, or is it coming from a place of okay, let's go to the line that's going to be quicker. So in your example, for example, right? If there's a long line, if there are two lines at the airport, and you choose to go to the short line, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If there are two lines in the airport, roughly the same size, and one has more people of color, and maybe don't understand the language or so on. And let me rephrase that. If it's a shorter line, but you go into the longer line because you just don't want to mess with the delays that's caused with going in the shorter line because of the language and so on. It might be a little bit of an unconscious bias, because these individuals might look different and have an accent. They may speak English better than all of us, right? So it's really about understanding the situation. If there's a lady or a man causing a ruckus, absolutely, right? That is likely going to cause a delay. You want to steer away from it. You go with your instincts. But I guess the short answer to your question is, is your decision unfair? Because there's so many different factors that go into it, right? What was it that triggered you to make that decision? What was the driver for you to move or to pick the line? If it was just I just went to the first line and that's where I stayed, right? Or was it I made a deliberate choice because? And then ask yourself the question: what was the deliberate choice? And was that a fair choice to make? Or was it maybe an unconscious bias that made you want to pick a different line? I don't know if that answers your question, but does that make sense?
He's, he said yes, absolutely, but you're lucky if there's just 2 to choose from.
That's true. that's true. Sometimes, well, you don't even have you don't even have that. But yes. So I think, and I think your question was absolutely spot on, and I really appreciate you bringing it up, because that's kind of the reality of the life we live in, right? It's not crystal clear. It's not that we know that we're going to walk into a situation where we will or will not have an unconscious bias. There's so many situations in our daily lives we don't know. And I think it's really around being able to acknowledge, okay, why did I make the choice that I did? And was it coming from from a bias, or was it coming from, honestly, I did what I did, right? But remember, sometimes even when you do what you did, it's coming from somewhere. And so just to assess, okay, did that cause an impact, or could it have? And it's a really, really tough one, because again, with unconscious biases, again, we have to be very careful, because it happens, right? We all have it, and we become more aware of it, yes, but we go through life and we're in different interactions. The key, though, is what are your actions doing, and what is the message that it sends? And remember, all your actions, every single action you take doesn't have to send a message, but it could be, but it could be, so going to McDonald's and ordering a hamburger doesn't have to have any biases in it, okay? Going to McDonald's and speaking really loudly because the cashier happens to have a hearing aid is an unconscious bias, because you're assuming that because they have a hearing aid that they have hearing difficulties and so they can't hear, versus speaking normally because of course they have an aid to help them hear, right? So again, so that's what triggers, right, your unconscious bias and how you react to it. I don't know if that makes sense. Any other questions?
It wasn't close enough, apparently. Hold on, we have a question in the back.
Sure.
Rachana, what we were just talking about reminds me of that famous movie with George Clooney. You know, what line do you get in? You get in behind the Asian, and that'll move faster. But it is split decisions that we make so often. I think of that all the time. When I go to the airport, I'm looking for that Asian, to get behind, and I know it's going to go quicker.
And that's not, again, and the funny, so that's again, the nice part about what you said though was, but you didn't, but the choices you made were more, again, what was the intent of that choice, right? It wasn't a negative choice. You didn't steer away from the line because the Asian intimidated you, because you felt that they brought a threat, or that they were, so you were kind of, you were going off of kind of the positives, right? Conversely, if there was an Asian who looked, was right after 9/11, with a beard. Again, the unconscious bias with you, I'm staying clear from that line, because who knows? So again, it really all goes back to what was the intent, and where's that decision coming from? Is it coming from a place of admiration, or is it coming from a place of fear or prejudice or concern?
And I think,
does that clarify?
yes, but I think one of the important things, the pieces here, is the unconscious piece. So, Chuck, kind of what you were talking about, that's an intentional choice that you're making, fed
That's a
by
fair point.
something kind of funny that you saw in a movie. But our unconscious bias is stuff that we don't quite realize we do. And unless we take the time to stop and analyze that relationship conversation or that moment in time and why there might have been negative feedback from the other person, we may not even notice that the bias exists because it's unconscious. It's not the thing we think in our brain. The example I often give is when I used to drive through kind of a rough neighborhood, I would lock my doors. I didn't think about it. I just reached over and locked the door. It wasn't like this thought that was like, I'm in an unsafe neighborhood, we should probably lock the door. It just happened automatically, and it wasn't until I thought through that action, what's causing that action, that I was like, oh, I'm making an assumption about a group of people who live in an impoverished neighborhood that I am no longer safe, and that's not necessarily true. But that whole process was very unconscious for me. I wasn't thinking that in my brain, it just happened. And so that's what makes this topic the most difficult, or one of the most difficult, is that it's not something you think about. It's something that happens behind the scenes.
And I think that's absolutely spot on. And thank you, and thank you for the clarification. You're right. There is bias, and then there's unconscious bias. And you're right. The example that you were citing was more of a conscious bias that was made, again, for reasons that weren't they weren't to downplay or think bad of someone. You're absolutely right. But it's interesting because even when there is a conscious bias, we just need to be careful of, what is the thought process behind that conscious bias? Because we want to make sure that we're not. It's not bringing in other below the surface biases, right? That perpetuate the issue. I don't know if that makes sense or not. You're absolutely right, though, Linda. It's the people who it's that instinctive reaction that you have, which is usually the one that's the hardest. It's hardest to explain, but also the hardest to assess and work on, because it's really being very, very mindful of who you are and what you're bringing into that situation, what you're doing in that neighborhood. You're right. It is an unconscious bias because you're trained, right, to say it's unsafe. For your safety, lock the door. Is that a bad thing? In the moment, it may not be a bad thing. But anytime you are in a neighborhood where you feel uncomfortable, and it happens to be because it's an underserved community, you have to ask this question of, okay, so is it more than just the fear of my safety? Is there something more that's underlying that causes me to stiffen up a little bit when I'm in that neighborhood, right? So it's to assess. Again, it's that assessment. Is it for my safety? Is that all that's driving this action, or is there more to it? And if there's more to it, that's when you have to ask the question, why? What might be triggering those additional biases that make me feel nervous when I'm in a neighborhood. Because again, remember, let's go back to the traffic light example. All unconscious biases aren't bad. Some of it is for it's a protective, it's for your protection, and it's a protective instinct that you have. But we can't use that as the fallback for all the reason for why we have an unconscious bias, right? There may be situations where that is the case, but we have to really peel the onion back and go, is that it, or is there more to it? And is that what's driving my behavior in other situations and circumstances as well? Any other questions?
More of a comment, listening to you and others talk, but I was thinking that, if everyone has an unconscious bias, and then you look at an individual who is biased, they have to realize that people are biased against them. So as Christians here on this call, when we claim the name of Christian, there's people out there that would be biased against us. They think that we're running around thumping people over the head with a Bible.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily true. I mean, I guess there are some people that do that, but I mean, not here in Anona anyway. But we have to realize that. So if it's unfair, if we feel that that's unfair to us as Christians, then we need to become more aware for others as well. We can't be unfair to others, no matter what it is, whether it's gender, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, no matter what.
Absolutely. So that's a very very good point that you raise, right? Because again, it's not, and we'll talk about, as we hopefully are sharing, is it's not just being the giver of unconscious bias, if you can put it that way, but it's also being the recipient, right? Or being one who is the victim of an unconscious bias, because you're right. I mean, it happens both ways. Let me ask no, I think someone asked a question. Can't a positive biases just be just as unfair? So yes, and I mean, I like your answer. Positive biases could be unfair on people. Again, it goes back to the intent, right? We're all positive. Actually, I'm not going to say all, but how many of us feel that are for those who have kids are the best in the world, bar none, right? No better than any other kid. I do. Don't tell my human ones, but my furry ones more so. But that's a positive bias that I have towards my kids, right? And that's okay. Where it becomes an issue is where maybe I start comparing my jokes aside, when I start comparing my human kids to other human kids, right? And now all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, mine's better because because they dress nicer, or they drive a better car, or they go to a better school. That's where my unconscious biases may start coming up, because what I'm saying is that it's not okay to come from an underprivileged community where you may not have the money and resources to buy better clothes, or my kids are better because they have better academic opportunities. That's where my positive bias towards my kids can turn into an unconscious bias that can hurt others, because or being the role model that I am to my kids, because then I'm telling them that it's important to be rich, it's important to value all the privileges that you have, versus respecting that a majority of the individuals in the world don't have those privileges, don't have those. And so are we saying that that's a bad thing? Are we saying that kids who aren't raised in a privileged environment are bad? Right? So it's really, it all comes back down to intent, in terms of positive or negative, right? Unconscious biases are really about how is that shaping your interactions with others? And I think that's the crux of what we need to ask ourselves in our interactions. Any other questions?
Yes, we have one. Hold on.
The question is, am I right if I think in the journey from a bias being unconscious to the point that we're aware, oh man, I have that bias, and that has happened to me, surprised me. And then as part of that, now that I'm aware I have this bias, do I want it? I think that's next. Is that something that, oh, that's fine, that's just part of me, that I'll keep? Or no, that's limiting my behavior, my thinking, everything in my conscious mind. So do I want it? Or would I like to work on getting rid of it?
And that's another fantastic question. I'd love to I'd love to use that as a segue to talk a little bit about just an example and a story of an eye-opening unconscious bias for me, because that is exactly what I struggled with. Was, oh man, I didn't realize that I had this unconscious bias, and then it forced me to think about my different interactions and how I interact. And it's like, well, I don't want to be that person. I want to, I don't want that bias. I want that bias to go away. Here's the thing: an unconscious bias is not something you can control. It's something that's innate in you. It's something that your past, your upbringing, your experiences have triggered in you. It's not really about getting rid of it. It's more about respecting that you might have and might is the word, right? Have an unconscious bias towards X, and being more aware of it as you have interactions. if you don't mind, I'd like to share my story with you, and hopefully that might help answer the question a little bit. I don't know how many of you were able to take the implicit bias test. I don't know if even for those in the room, if there's a show of hands.
We've had several opportunities. So yes, we have quite a few in the room who've taken it, and I know our friends were invited to take it prior to this event as well.
Perfect. Fantastic. Sherry, you're right. It's no longer, when you say it's no longer unconscious bias, when you recognize it, you're right. But that's recognizing the bias. But that unconscious piece of it, again, unless you're working towards really recognizing that you do have, or you could have a bias towards something, you're right. It becomes, it's not so much that the bias is unconscious, it's your actions become unconscious unless you're working, unless you proactively recognize that, I might have a bias towards something, and I need to make sure that my actions don't reflect that bias. So going back to my, the cat example, I do prefer dogs to cats, and I know it. I'm not going to one day get up and likely like cats more than dogs, but I know enough to make sure that I don't let the cat or the cat owner feel that I am treating the cat any differently. So I have to make more of an effort to recognizing that I have that bias. I see a hand that's raised. Julius, I think.
Oh, that was in response to whether I took the test. Sorry.
Thank you. So, I took the test too. I took it several years ago. And the result I got was, and I did the one on race. It's a little bit different now with the implicit test, but this was about skin color. So it was about, are you more biased towards light-skinned people or dark-skinned people, right? And to what level? And so I took the test. I'm an HR professional. I work in diversity and inclusion. I got this, right? And so I was expecting kind of a little middle of the road answer. Guess what my answer was? I was, and by the way, this test is one that's proven by psychologists. It's proven. I mean, the way the test is run, there's no rhyme or reason. So it's not like it's manipulating you into an answer. It's really how you react, right? So, and I say this because my initial reaction was, there's no way. So it basically said that I had a mild bias, however you put it, I guess, against darker skinned people. I had more of a bias towards, I guess I had a bias against darker skinned people. And I was just like, this is wrong. This is absolutely, there's no way. I'm Indian. I'm dark skinned myself. What are they talking about? How could I have that bias in me? This test is wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm going to take it again. This is just nuts. So I took it again. Same results. Took it 3 times. And I'm in denial going, how is that even possible? I mean, I was in a situation in 9/11 where I had a 1-year-old, very Indian-looking little boy, and basically some very harsh words were said to us because they assumed we were Arab. I mean, so I know what it's like, to be in that skin color and to feel those, forget unconscious, very, 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 very consciously prejudiced against my skin color, right? So what is going on here? And so I was talking to the facilitator who was helping us with this unconscious bias training that we were having, and basically, she was like, look, think back, go all the way back, your upbringing, your values, your culture, everything there is, right? And think about what might be triggering this. I'm from India. I'm in a country full of dark-skinned people. I mean, so what about this upbringing? I grew up in countries, Africa, in Europe. I mean, everywhere. Where is this coming from? And I thought about it, and I thought about my culture. I thought about my upbringing, and you know what triggered me? It took me a little while for me to finally get to this because I was in denial. I was at home in India with my parents, and there was a commercial on the radio, And it was a commercial I've heard since I was a little girl. Every time I'd go back to India and listen, and spend summers with my family. And it was about this product, and it's called Fair and Lovely. So Fair and Lovely is a soap that allegedly, when you use it with frequency, lightens your skin. And it's sold to women to make them fair and more attractive and more marriageable. Okay. And that just triggered for me, all my life, I grew up, listening to, oh, I will, the bride in India, with marriages, oh, the girl has to be fair. We want the wheat complected, not the dark complected girl. It was always about skin color. It was, and so somewhere, somehow that must have stuck with me, where from an unconscious bias, right? I put value on the color of a skin inadvertently. Does that make me a bad person? I truly hope not, because that's not my intent. But it really helped me recognize and realize that, wow, yes, it was a slap in the face. And when you read the results, right, the first reaction is one of defensiveness and no. But it really helped me understand that, I come from a culture that really does value this. And inadvertently, is that really in my conscious, right? Is that unconsciously something that I react to? So that helped me understand why the results came out the way it did. So now the question that you asked, right? So what do I do about it? So knowing that, knowing that, it's accepting that, okay, I understand where it's coming from. I can't let that go away. It's too ingrained in who I am. But what I can do is be more aware. So when I am in conversations, when I'm in diverse groups, I make sure by my actions and my behaviors that I'm being as inclusive as I can, that I'm interacting, I'm very consciously interacting, because I don't want those unconscious biases to come out, because that is not who I am. Unconscious biases aren't what make you who you are. It's how you respond to them, how you react to them, and recognizing and dealing with it, that really drives it, right? And for me, I never want to be seen as a person that has that bias, right? Do I publicly tell people this? Well, I am today, but no, outside of this session, I don't, because it's my bias. But it's something that I need to recognize that I might have, and I need to be very careful to make sure that inadvertently it doesn't slip up. And it becomes very unconscious, right? So this is if I'm in a room, in a diverse room of people, and interacting with salespeople, do I go to where all the lighter skinned people are, or do I make sure that I'm going out there and I'm interacting with everyone, because I want to make sure that I'm not behaving in a way that feeds to my unconscious bias. So I take a pause to see if anyone wants to kind of share their reactions, their experiences.
They're all just looking at me.
I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but in recognition of difficulties that people of color have had recently in the United States, growing up in the South, I have consciously tried to reach out in a grocery store, in the street, to just openly speak to them and smile to them, just like, brothers or friends or things like that. And it is so heartwarming, because they're just people, and they smile and are good to me, and we have a big old time. So I found a good benefit in that.
No, and that's thank you. That's wonderful to share. And it's recognizing that we role model through our actions, right? People in our lives look up to us, and even if they don't, right? It's how do we want to? Look at the end of the day. There's someone greater than all of us watching us, right? And what do you want God to see us do? How do you want Him to see how we interact with people, right? Is it with the heart of love and treating everyone equally, because in His eyes everyone is the same, or Is it be is consciously treating people differently because of biases, whether they're unconscious or not. And Emmy, right? You say not to behave in a way that reinforces our discovered biases. So we all have biases. Listen, people. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, there was a point in time in our history where discrimination was allowed and it was accepted. So we come from a history where it was accepted. It doesn't make us bad people. It just recognizes that that's part of the upbringing that we may have been part of, but knowing that, how do we behave in a way that doesn't reinforce that? How do we behave in a way that that we would want to be treated, right? Have you? And so I'd love to ask this question: Have you been a victim of bias? Forget unconscious, but just bias. And if you are, would you be willing to share?
I suppose since I'm standing in front of the room and I shook my head, it's only appropriate. I do work in Pinellas County Schools. Our team knows this about me. And the work I do currently, I'm a site-based MTSS coach, which means I systemically work towards doing better things for kids. And when I stepped out of my teaching role, I wanted to stay with the group of kids I was with. I worked in South St. Pete at a middle school in South St. Pete, and I wanted to stay with the kids I was with, but I wanted to have a bigger impact outside of the classroom. And there was a specific school that was just a hot mess, and I wanted that school so bad. I wanted to be their MTSS coach. It was a K-12 school. I felt really strongly that if we could start systems when kids are in kindergarten and first and second grade, we could make an impact all the way through middle school. I was so excited. And so I put my application in, I read their SIP plan, I learned all their data, and I was ready. And then I got word from a friend who works at the district that I wasn't going to be offered an interview. And I was like, why not? And he said, well, they're really looking for someone that looks more like the children. And so I wasn't ready. I mean, I'm totally prepared. And so my knee-jerk reaction is, fine, I'll go be an MTSS coach somewhere else, and I'll do a really, really good job, and y'all be sad you didn't pick me. And so that was my process of thinking. But in that moment, and I think the part, and this I've shared a couple of times, the part of me that was hurt and sad in that one moment really built my emotional capacity for folks that feel that every day, all the time. This happened to me in this one tiny incident in my life, and it was really awful, and it felt terrible, but I could go home and close the door and be done with that, and that moment was over, and I had a time to process it, and then it was good. But I have friends who have that moment because their name is ethnically different, or when they come into an interview, there's some assumptions that are made, and that happens to them every day, all the time. And that then really brought into my understanding and why I continue to pour into this work, because that's when my heart opened up to this work and understanding. So there's my story. Does anybody else have one they want to share?
Thank you for sharing.
No. Oh, Paul does. Paul sent me a message. And this is a question for you, ma'am. It says, can we actually rid ourselves of a morally undesirable or unconscious bias that we've identified, or do we just have to govern our actions contrary to the bias?
Govern your actions contrary to the bias. Unfortunately, it is what it is, right? It's in your DNA. It's who you are. That doesn't make you a bad person. It's recognizing and suppressing it, right? And is what this is all about. We all have unconscious biases, but exactly like you said, right? If we were conscientiously to really suppress those biases, that's how we can take our steps forward. Now, having said that, right? I mean, it depends. I'm not contradicting what I said, but I just want to clarify that to say, but now that becomes less of an unconscious bias. It becomes a conscious awareness that you might have a bias towards X or Y, and so now there's more of an opportunity to be able to be more aware, right, of your interactions, because now you've kind of surfaced it into a conscious bias. There's a comment in here coming from India. I suffer from the fair and lovely syndrome. Join the club, yes. And I am learning to be intentional about getting over it. That's part of it. The other part of it for me is also understanding. And this really helped me after my 9/11 instance with my son, right? Because I was petrified. I was like, I mean, because I get the whole nation was scared. There were a lot of misconceptions about what it was to be a Middle Eastern versus Indian versus Pakistani versus any of it. And by the way, not all Middle Easterners are bad. In fact, 99.9999999 to the nth degree aren't. Same with Americans, right? Same with Indians and Italians. Inherently, we're good people. Unfortunately, it's a few bad apples that really impact how we think about them. But anyone who knows me knows that I'm a hothead, and my initial reaction was protective mama bear and go, what the heck are you doing? This is illegal. This is discrimination. You can't treat me like this, right? Because of the color of my skin. And by the way, I was newly minted citizen of the United States, and I became a citizen in 2001. So I was sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?" And so I had a lot of emotions going through me, and I literally had to. And this is a true story. I had to take a step back, and it was just as I was getting more involved in my church, and I had to go, okay, what would Jesus want me to do? And it was basically, was this an act of prejudice, or was this an act of ignorance? And I had to really take a step back out from my anger to realize that in this instance, I think it was ignorance. It was ignorance coupled with fear that resulted in the action, in the behavior. And so for me, hard as it was, I chose to forgive and move on and say, what can I do to help deal with educating the ignorant? Because it's easy to educate, but if there's an outright prejudice, right, it's really hard to change the opinion. And so, for me, it's about is even something as as the fair and lovely is, when those comments are made to me, is it coming from a prejudice, or is it coming from more of a this is just how it is, right? And not understanding the impact. And so trying to be able to explain, right? So what does skin color have to do with this? And being able to try to find a way to educate, to help them see that, okay, that may not be something worth isolating a person for. Any other questions or comments or experiences you'd like to share?
Well, it's me again. This is Susan. I just have to share an experience that my husband and I had, and because you were talking about after 9/11, and this happened after 9/11 to us. So my husband is Bulgarian, but now his hair is gray now, but back then it wasn't, and it was jet black. And if you looked at my husband, if you saw him with his black hair, he does have Middle Eastern features. And before I knew him and I just saw him, I actually thought he was Middle Eastern. So I figured, well, if I thought it, other people probably did too. So, and I'm Hispanic, and I know you probably can't see me, but I have dark hair and all that good stuff. So anyway, we were in Publix right after 9/11, and we were walking down one of the aisles, and there was a woman coming towards us with her wagon, and when she turned the corner to come down the same aisle facing us, she actually stopped dead in her tracks, made an audible gasp, and turned that wagon around so fast and raced down that aisle in the opposite direction. And my husband and I was just standing there going, what? Which I'm going to curse in church. We like, what the hell was that? And then we realized, because this was soon after 9/11, she looked at us and panicked, just based on our looks. And then another incident similar, soon after 9/11, we were actually in the airport in Tampa picking up my cousin who was coming in from New York. And it was my husband, my sister, and myself. And we were followed throughout that entire airport. Followed. Same person. Every store we went in, that guy was there. Every store, because we couldn't go, over to the terminal part because of the restrictions. Everywhere we went. And I was oblivious at first. And my husband and my sister were like, who is this guy? Because it was like, he was everywhere we were.
Absolutely.
He was. And that's when we figured it out.
No, thank you for sharing. Yes. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. It was the reality, right? And again, because that was triggered by panic and by not knowing. But yes, it's so hurtful, because you're no different than anyone else. So why were you looked at differently?
So I'm going to give you a little 5-minute warning, but also I'm going to share this comment online because my friends in the audience cannot see what I can see. One of the things that were shared was one of the participants online has a granddaughter with dark skin, and through 13 years of school had never experienced a teacher of color. So that child never saw a role model that looked like them in their educational process.
Yes, and that can absolutely happen, right? Because and that leads to a sense of belonging and community, right? Because it's about how does your grandchild identify herself? Because if she's not surrounded by that diversity that she has, it does impact an individual. It's funny. I have 2 kids, and I married a Caucasian, and my daughter, actually both my son and daughter definitely don't look white. My son looks Indian. My daughter looks like a little mix of both the cultures. But we raised them in the U.S. In a very, very, very American culture. And that's I regret that, but I'm also seeing as I see them as adults, right? I see that they associate themselves, not associate as in they define themselves as white. Because that's the environment in which they grew, and it's interesting because they're less, and they have friends that are all skin colors and all nationalities and so on, but when you ask them, culturally, which culture do they affiliate with, their biases towards being more on the Western culture than the Indian culture, and so when they do go to India or when they hang out with our Indian friends, you can see that discomfort, right? And it's funny because if you put my son in a room, you would not assume he had any white in him, but yet, as far as he's concerned, that's who he is, because that's fundamentally who he grew up with. That's the culture in which he grew up, right? So he feels much more affiliated, and so it's hard when you're in a situation and you look and affiliate differently than where you would be expected to affiliate, and it does create challenges for the individual, but it also creates an awareness, because he's the first one to point out, just because I'm brown doesn't mean that I know everything about the Indian culture, right? Because that's what people tend to do, is ask him questions about the Indian culture, and it's that explanation of that. He's calling people out on their unconscious bias, right? Of, I just assume that you have an Indian name and you look Indian, so therefore you must know all about India. And he's like, no, that's not who I am. And it's interesting to see how this starts playing out even in the next generation, right? Because for them, it's not as prevalent. And it's nice to see that, there are other reasons of bias. So please don't take it the wrong way. But when it comes to skin color, what we're finding is that the younger generations are less inclined to have those unconscious biases, because they were raised in an environment, again, with this generation of parents that were more accepting, right? And that it wasn't as much of an issue or a taboo or whatever the case may be. So it's nice to see that evolution. But at the end of the day, we all need to make sure, right, that It might not just be skin tone, it might be other biases, as we talked about the different types, ageism, weight, tattoos, whatever the case may be. And it's really recognizing that those biases come from a whole slew of experiences, perspectives, values that make up who we are, and recognizing that, and recognizing the impact that those biases might have on our interactions with one another, is what can help us more consciously become more inclusive as individuals.
Rachana, we have one more comment, and then we'll be wrapping up for the night.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I just have a question. How do we begin a conversation with our friends and family members who, number one, have expressed discomfort in that we are here tonight listening and open, wanting to learn about this topic, and two, those who have expressed in our circle of friends some very biased opinions against people of color or immigrants?
What a lovely way to close. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So the first part, to me, it's about education. It's about conversation. It's about understanding. So what is, and understanding their perspective as well. What is it that makes you feel this way towards, and if you're talking skin color, towards people of different skin colors, what makes them different, right? So part of it is that education. Part of it is being the advocate to say, how can through examples can we demonstrate that the generalizing of statements, right, that now become a stereotype, how it can be hurtful, and being able to sometimes reverse it. I think the example that was brought up about, well, we want to hire someone that looks more like the kids. How did that make you feel? So it can happen. It can happen, if you want to put it this way, to a majority skin color as much as it can to a minority skin color, right? But really, it's about educating and explaining and understanding. A lot of times, it's really about how do you have it hit close to home to say, wow, I can't have generalizing. I can't generalize because every situation is unique, and we can't just assume that one experience is a shared experience with everybody else in that affinity group that we interact with. I think step one is, and if you can just go to my last slide, because I think it's a great way to wrap this up. Step one is really to acknowledge that we have, we can skip this slide and go to the next one. We have to recognize that we all have unconscious biases, and it's really about taking time and doing some introspective, just assessment of ourselves and our behaviors to say, where could ours be? What could ours be? And it's not like we make a list and that's the list, right? We discover every day that, ooh, this could be a trigger. This could be, and so it's just being conscious of that. They're not always bad. They're not always good. We just need to be aware that we have them. We all have our stories where we've been excluded due to someone else's bias. Let's use that, and let's use that to remember and remind how it made us feel, and be more deliberate in avoiding inadvertently making others feel that way. So to answer your question, the third bullet, I think, is the advice I would give you, right? How do you use examples of your own stories to make a point about being more deliberate about not generalizing? To ensure unconscious bias doesn't lead to exclusion, we need to be self-aware and how it might have an impact on the others. So, just knowing that I had that result with the skin tone, I'm overly sensitive to it now. So when I'm recruiting, I make sure I don't look at names on resumes. I want to make sure that everything I do is done in a way that it doesn't, it can be construed as any biases, in terms of looking at applicants. So it's just what are things that you can do to make sure that you don't impact and perpetuate the bias. It's not just the above the waterline that defines our biases, but it's below the surface as well. And so again, it's the experiences. It's not that I'm Indian, because it's the experiences that I have. What is it that makes me who I am, and what biases will that bring forward? And when in doubt, seek to understand more. There's a lot of times I will, and this again goes beyond just skin tone, right? It's nationality, it's sexual orientation, whatever it is. A person with a disability, I will just go out to have coffee with someone, and a colleague at work, and I go just get to know that person, just understand perspectives. Tell me about your experiences, and it's a great way for me to just have an appreciation of the value and the diversity that those individuals bring, and really help me gain an appreciation about the uniqueness that each of us bring into this world, and how we are all a gift, and how we can use our gift of who we are to really be inclusive with the people we interact with.
Rachana, we just want to say thank you so much for taking some time out of what we know is a very busy schedule.
Thank you.
For you to be with us. It was making me think of conscious discipline. We teach a thing with our preschool, our teachers and our staff at the church. Many of us have gone through what's called conscious discipline training. And it was making me think of the story of the tape. That there's a tape that's inside of us that we have that plays. And that's just an automatic tape that runs. And what Dr. Becky Bailey talks about is you have to have, she talked about it from a CD-ROM perspective. All right, so if you think of the old CD-ROMs, you can't write on them. All right, they're a read-only memory. That's what ROM stands for, right? So it's read-only memory. That's inside of us. And all you can do is get another one and put it in too. So I love the way you're talking about it from the perspective of the conscious discipline or unconscious bias. It's not that it goes away, it's that you have another choice when you become conscious of what it is that you were previously unconscious of. And now you have the choice, I think that's sort of getting to what you were talking about, Joe, of it's just a decision now. And you need to, hopefully, from a Christian perspective, we're seeking to become more aware of who we are and how we interact with one another, and that we start to choose the new CD-ROM. And that doesn't mean that there's not going to be moments where you're upset, you're angry, something comes out that you didn't mean to have come out. For me, that moment is own it. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Cynthia, your question here at the close. I was thinking about just from a conflict perspective. If I was to tell somebody how to engage in conflict with somebody, first build a relationship, listen first, engage with them, trying to understand their position before you try and impose yours. Find ways to just be in dialogue with another person that gives them the safety to say, well, here's how I feel, that might give you over time the ability to express what your thoughts are, and that you end up stretching them a little bit, and you stretch you. You might learn something along the way if you're willing to actually let down your biases. I think I can't remember who I was sharing with here, but I had a conversation with somebody regarding this on the race issue. And I'm saying, the class you've been teaching was one of the things, all right? And so April's been graciously teaching some of our youth and their parents. And a person was upset, thinking that we were just indoctrinating our church into this one style of teaching. And I said, it's like, okay, one, it's not just the students, it's the students and the parents are doing this, and the parents are agreeing for their students to go through this together. That was one. Two, as they sort of pushed back at me, was, well, here's the materials you're using, here's what I read. And as soon as they said that, I realized my problem. I'm not seeking to understand their view. All right, so even in things like race, would a person that's on one side of the aisle or the other necessarily be coming out straight out saying, I'm a racist? No, they're not. Now, we might perceive them in that way from our side of the aisle on any particular issue. I always talk about we can argue over many issues. Pick your issue, and you're always going to think they're wrong. Maybe you need to understand it a little more. So I think that's, from my perspective, the Christian heart. Seek to understand, seek to listen, engage in the conversation, love the person, even if you don't love their position. And if we can get to that place, maybe the church becomes more of a model for what the world should be than what the world is right now. April, you have any closing comments?
guys are amazing, and I'm so grateful for every opportunity to be here and watch us learn and grow together. This is always the highlight of my week, getting to come and share thoughts with you, with our youth and our families. I am running another class for people in Be the Bridge, which, shameless plug. Please, if you have anybody in your lives that are looking to move in this direction, start having these conversations. It's a wonderful program that just teaches you to first reflect internally, grow our awareness, understand who we are, start to open up and be comfortable with who we are. But it's a Christian walk. So it's, what does God say about this? What does the Bible say about this? What does it say we should be doing for others? Then we start the Bridge to Justice, which is really starting to understand how it's harmful to those people that we love in our communities who are being underserved. And then it is being an advocate for them. How do we move forward in a way working in relationship with, not doing things for or to, which I think is wonderful. But the entire walk is through the Bible, through our Christian faith, and just how do we wrestle with this? And I tell my groups every time, I could do this. Every time I teach it, I learn something more about myself, something more about how to do this work. So even if you've sat with me, what's Karen? I love Karen. This is her second time around. And I feel like every time we all grow just a little bit more. So if you know of anybody that's interested, we'll probably be running another one in the spring. So just keep a lookout for that. But it's Be the Bridge, and it's a great way to walk into this work.
Thank you, April. Rachana, thank you again. If you guys are unfamiliar with Stand Up with Anona, if you're not a part of that group, if you're online, you're not a part of that group, we're not exclusive to Anona. We're open to anybody joining. So far, what we've done now is move past, so sort of like what you're hearing from April, we've moved from being a group that just gathered and read a book together and talked about that to breaking into 4 different groups. One group is focused on education. One group is focused on looking at our church, Anona, not like the district group. The district's looking at the district and helping us as a church look at ourselves. But we're looking at ourselves as an Anona and saying, what about us? What's the unconscious things about who we are and how we are that makes us a 99 point, like your statistic, Rachana, 99.999999% white congregation for the most part. We've got a group that's working on conferences, so we have some events that are hopefully coming up, thanks to Adrian and some of our connections there, to be able to get some things running that we were trying to run in August of this past year. You'll see those opportunities coming up called Bridging the Gap. And then we have our missions or our outreach group that is with Jackie, and she's helping us to sort of say, how do we form connections out in the community? And so we formed a lot of connections with Ridgecrest. If any of those types of things excites you, or you're interested in, or you want to have questions answered about it, reach out to us, richard@anona.com, casey@anona.com, jackie@anona.com. I'd give out other people's email addresses, but I don't know them off the top of my head, unless it ends with anona.com. And with that, let's pray, and we'll let you all go. God, we thank you. We thank you for Rachana and the heart that she has just brought, not just into this moment, the heart that she brings into her work with her company throughout the world. And Lord, you can just hear and see that heart shining. We ask that you continue to bless her in her work at, I would call, a ministry of helping people to feel welcome no matter who they are, and helping us to be able to explore how it is that we interact with others, and hopefully in a way that just does not bring us down as individuals, that brings us up, that we can actually look at ourselves with integrity, try and see ourselves with your eyes, and find the places where we can improve and be more like your Son, Jesus Christ. Help us all in that journey, we pray, and we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks so much once again.
So nothing to worry about.